All right, welcome back, and I want to talk today about boundaries around your own behaviors. Uh, if you're struggling with alcohol, drugs, sex, whatever your struggle is, helping clients understand um, the steps. I've worked with so many addicts over 30, 40 years now that have said, I don't know how I got here. I'm drunk, and I said, well, what was going on? I don't know. I just started drinking, or I just started jonesing and I went and got drugs and I'm stoned, or I'm sexually acting out. I've had a relapse. I don't know why. I don't know where it happens. I mean, I've worked with clients that have had repetitive slips and relapses over a period of years and no clue as to what's going on or why. And so one of the things that we're finding very, very helpful in our workshops and in our practice is breaking it down and analyzing it. So part of Show Up 365 is about that. So I encourage you. I know it's hard to keep doing things day after day after day until you get into a habit of it. But if you'll do that, if you'll go on and keep up with your daily inventories, you're going to break down and analyze what's going on, when is it going on, and how you can best protect yourself and maintain sobriety. Sobriety is possible. It just is. And, working this process of understanding how do I make a series of decisions that I self-destruct. And so this is what I want to look at today. How do we do that? Step by step, what is our rituals, and how to place in boundaries. Now, first of all, just quickly go through, we've talked about the family wounds in the family and the culture and the growing up period, and that those wounds create a message of shame, a feeling of shame, that something is inherently wrong with us. Then we've talked about the triggers from our environment, whether it's, in a sin is in a state that what we initially think is maybe I'm hungry, angry, lonely, tired, bored, or stressed. But I think that a lot of it has to do with a shame message, that I am a failure, I'm not enough, I'm weak, I'm incompetent, I'm, whatever, I'm unwanted, I'm unlovable. Those basic shame core messages, and then the trigger in the environment sends us into a tailspin. We begin to fantasize about, well, the fantasy is about trying to correct the message of shame. And so we began to fantasize. We either fantasize and begin jonesing about drugs or using drugs or alcohol or sex. Bottom line is that these things are promising. They're holding out. They're the elixir of life with a promise that somehow or another they can magically transform who we believe we to be. And then we begin to ritualize this fantasy, and then we act out. Now, the rest of the cycle. We end up in despair, depression, sadness, the day after, the week after, whatever else. The consequences that hit us. And then we cycle through guilt and shame. And then we return back to the whole process of fantasizing and go through it again. Now, those rituals and that whole process can be hours, days, weeks, months, or years. It all depends. So it depends on your particular type of ritualization. Now, we'll talk about that. Because, see, one of the things is that I want you to realize is that you start out with a lifestyle that's balanced, that we're up there, and we live balanced. What happens is that something begins to happen in our life, and a ball begins to roll. The weight, the momentum of our addictive thinking begins to move, and we begin to obsess or preoccupy about our addiction, certain components of it, or whatever else. And it's not long as that begins to roll, the energy, the neurochemistry begins to kick in. It's not long until we're beginning to ritualize. We will break down our rituals. Now, the rituals can be lasting, like I said earlier, they can be things I don't think about it, all the way to pretty elaborate rituals to the process of once you begin to act out, and you're down here. Now, bottom line is, how do you stop this? And what you got to do is that you got to have a commitment to recovery. Then you got to have awareness of your triggers. What out there really triggers you or sends you down the rabbit hole, and then to establish an antidote for triggers. Now, I'm going to say this right now, and it's not part of this whole thing, but you're going to hear me over and over and over talk about this. I believe that the fertile ground of triggers is shame. And so shame grows and multiplies, according to Brene Brown, through three things: secrecy, silence, and judgment. And that can all happen within my mind without anybody knowing anything of what's going on inside of me. And I'm out here just foaming with shame and empowering and that's the trigger, that's the setup. Then along comes something else that then sends me off down the rabbit hole, and I'm already down the process, and I'm down here. and I'm into this area of despair and the secret life and shame and guilt and the, and the hopelessness that I feel when I'm down here in the pain. Now, you got to stop it up here. Waiting down to here to try to stop something is going to end up where you just can't stop the whole process. So bottom line, we're going to look at how do we begin to set up something here that's going to protect us from going that way. I'll show you a chart, a timeline of how to do that. But the key would be is that as the trigger happens and we have these boundaries in place, it stops it early on. Then we can begin to build real awareness of my rituals and set up boundaries around that, which we're going to talk about. It keeps you from going all the way into here. Now, what I'm going to challenge you to do is to create a timeline. I want you to begin at either one point. You start where your last time that you got drunk, the last time that you used drugs, or the last time that you acted out in some way. And so bottom line is then work it. You can work it backwards or you can work it forwards. So can you take it back to where it first became aware of a trigger? So you go either way. You go towards the point of acting out or your first trigger where you're aware of experiencing this trigger. Then I want you to trace your steps, step by step by step by step, as small as you can make them, all the way to the point where you've drugged, you drunk, you drank, or you acted out. Now, then I want you to go through, as you've gotten all those steps done, place them in there. I've done this here. Now, this could be over a period of days, hours, months, and I've had clients that this process of ritualization would take as much as years. So the whole process of coming to here. Now, there are alcoholics that I've worked with that they didn't go out and binge but once a year. They go out and tie on a good one. I've worked with drug addicts that would only use about 3-4 times out of a year, 3-4 days out of a year. They go on a crack run or a coke run. And bottom line, they just go out and spend whatever they happen to have in their pocket. They are limited themselves to that, and they go off and disappear for 4 or 5 days. That was it. The rest of the year, they were productive human beings. And it's like they went on those binges. Now, after we began to break it down, they began to see that this, although this acting out started all the way back here, and it only happened once a year, they had a year-long process of rituals that took place that was significant for us to break down and look at. So I just challenge you to do this, to spend time. You need to do a timeline. I would recommend you working this out with your counselor so that you and your counselor can break it down. I don't care if it's drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling, spending, whatever it is, you got rituals, and you'll do them. Now, as you begin to do this, I want you to list out all those processes that happened here. Now, what we're going to do here is you've done that, we're going to begin to put down boundaries. Now, go back to where we talked about tools of recovery, because here we began to do it. Where can you begin to put boundaries that you don't do it? Suppose that we're talking about sexually acting out. Well, maybe one of your early rituals is to get on the internet and begin to scan, see what you can find. Maybe you work at higher levels. You do snacking. You're not really into the pornography. You're not into the dating sites, but you're snacking around with stuff that's on the fringe. We call that snacking. Well, that's where you're really going through this battle right here at the video. Am I or am I not going to make this decision? What am I going to choose to do? Well, this is one of the areas where you can put up a boundary right here, is that you put filters on your internet. And don't let your spouse be the accountability person. I want you to hear me real carefully here. If you're going to have somebody that's in your accountability, it shouldn't be your spouse. Now, are you accountable to your spouse? Yes. But they cannot help you stay sober. That's their craziness. They got to stay out of it. So what you do is you set somebody in your support group up, mainly your sponsor, to receive your internet reports. And so when you cross that line, then they hear it, and then you can have your sponsor call your spouse and say, you crossed the line. Now, so she or he's in the loop. Bottom line, though, they're not responsible for managing your recovery. They can't do that. That's them crossing that line we talked about earlier. So that's one of them. You might find yourself at some point here putting in another tool of recovery. If you get further down and something else is happening and you find yourself moving on down the process of your triggers, then make a call. In other words, I will make a call. If I get to this point and I'm wanting to get on the phone, or I'm wanting to start surfing, or I'm wanting to go drive somewhere, then I go make a call. You put that up there. Making a call is a boundary. You call to somebody to get off the ledge. You to get them to talk you down, get you grounded. If you have to, then you set up a meeting and do a coffee or do something. The next thing is, okay, if that's find yourself a meeting. You know, I've had clients that were recovering sex addicts, that there were times where they would go to an AA meeting if they had to, just to get to a meeting. They couldn't find an SA meeting right away that night, and they knew they needed a meeting. They went to AA. It worked. They went somewhere rather than acting out. It kept them sober. It was one of those boundaries that kept them in place. Then the next thing is call your sponsor, get a meeting, or call your therapist and say, okay, this is where I am. I'm really struggling. Help me break it down. You know, doing those things you begin to pull together all your tools of recovery, the village around you that's going to help you stay sober, and you can prevent going here. The total outcome is that you end up staying sober. You know, you keep these walls up here, you don't go here. Now, my recommendation is the more that you can put up on this front end here, the more you front load your whole process, the less likely you're going to go through this wall. These boundaries are to keep you doing this. You know, I'm sober, so that you can come in every single evening and tell your spouse, I want you to know I'm sober, I'm doing well. I was a little shaky today, but I did these things. I made the calls. I made a group. I called my therapist. I talked to my sponsor. You did the things you needed to do. This is what your spouse needs to hear. This is what I'm doing. So when you come and you say, well, how'd your day go? Well, I had to make some calls today. I'm going to go to a group after supper tonight, and I've got a meeting with my sponsor after the meeting. Now, what does that show you? Bottom line, if I establish boundaries that I don't go there anymore without having these tools in place and these boundaries in place, then I can stay sober. That's my encouragement to you. So that somewhere along the way, sobriety, you become to realize that sobriety is a possibility. Not only is it a possibility, it's a preferred outcome, and that you can do it. You can do this. Work with your sponsor, work with your therapist, get this done. Thank you.